On this special edition of Q&A, we're going to learn what a tavern, a hotel, a brothel, a restaurant, and the origins of Saint Hubert Parish all have in common. We'll visit a place that residents of Schaumburg and Hoffman Estates, and even the likes of notorious mob boss Al Capone, have all frequented. This is St. Buggy Whip.
Saint Hubert formed as a community of the faithful long before it became a faith community. In 1957, 365 of the 400 families living in Schaumburg Township were Catholic. Many attended Mass at St. Theresa Parish in Palatine, but they needed a place closer to home, a parish to call their own. Enter the newly opened Buggy Whip Lounge, a building with roots dating back to 1911. Kruger's Inn and Boarding House was built at 17 South Roselle Road, just south and east of the intersection of Schaumburg and Roselle Road, in what was then simply known as Schaumburg Township. Kruger's Inn was the go-to place for many of the crew who paved Schaumburg Road during that time period. Township resident Frank Langle purchased the boarding house in the 1920s and re-established the business as Langle's Schaumburg Inn, known for its chicken and steak dinners and Friday fish fry. Frequented by the early residents of Schaumburg and Hoffman Estates, local legend claims that notorious mob boss Al Capone was an occasional guest at Langle's. On February 6, 1958, Donald Little opened the Buggy Whip Lounge after leasing the building from Frank Langle. At the same time, Father Arthur O'Brien, then pastor of St. Theresa Parish, addressed families from the Hoffman Estates and Schaumburg area. Father O'Brien offered to provide a priest for Mass if they could find a place closer to home to accommodate them. So a group of men went searching for a home for the Catholic population, and Mr. Little, who was known for his philanthropy, agreed to allow these families to hold Sunday Mass in the dining room of his establishment, which became affectionately known as St. Buggy Whip. We've returned to the original place where our parish began, along with a special group of people who helped start it all.
This is the home of the former St. Buggy Whip Church. With me today is Joan Jarzemsky, Jeanne Murphy, Mary Kelly, and Dick AmRhein, some of the early Buggy Whippers. Today we're in Fat Fat Restaurant, but we thought we'd start with a nice tour of what the restaurant is today and how it was set up when it was St. Buggy Whip. Dick, you want to take it from here?
Well, as I recall, this of course is all new now with the bar here and the stairway. That was never here before. This was one large open room, and we had the altar at this end of the room, and then the chairs were all set up this way, facing this way. Well, it went all the way to that wall there, I think.
Yeah.
So we had the full length of this as it was a banquet room, and we used it as a church.
I don't know about the altar. I'm wondering if it's the same one we used in the church.
No.
It is not. No.
Okay. And
It was more of a hand-built one, I
It
think.
was kind of just like a regular kitchen table
Yeah.
on wheels that we rolled back and forth.
Yeah.
So,
But this was all wide open here. There was no stairway or bar, as I mentioned. And you had the services right here. I think there was there just 2 masses on Sunday?
at 8 o'clock
8
and
o'clock
10
and 10
o'clock.
o'clock, okay.
And about how many people would attend Mass between the two Masses?
It's hard to say because it was overflowed.
It filled the room
It
up.
filled-
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
And then if you got late, you had to stay at the bar and just listen. You couldn't see because this was all closed off where the bar was.
Well, now, you know, a lot of St. Hubert families would know Father Winsek was our first pastor, right? But he really wasn't the first priest at St. Buggy Whip, right? So, Father Sullivan.
From St. Sage.
Tell us about Father Sullivan. What do you know about him?
He was, all what I know was he gave an excellent homily and he had a great sense of humor. and he kind of talked about having mass in a beer place. Which he said he never thought when he became a priest that he would be serving mass in a beer place. And he didn't call it a tavern, or he didn't call it saloon, or he didn't call it a bar, he called it a beer
place. So the chairs had to go really all the way back, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And was it a younger parish then?
Oh, there were,
My street is just 1 block long, and we had 24 children on my block. Little.
Well, and again, not to make this personal, but I will. You know, I went to school literally with all of your children. And so my understanding is that, you know, the bar would close at like 2 in the morning. And by 6 in the morning the next day, people would be here to set up.
that's right, that's right.
And Dick, you talked about before how, you know, you'd set this up, this elaborate church space, but you could still smell the beer and everything next door. Dick Clark talks about that in his blog post as well. He says, I just remember being this 13-year-old boy, and you'd come and do mass, and all you could smell was the beer and latrine.
Very, very heavy beer.
Stale beer.
Stale beer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, they had a curtain across here that they would close off that area. You know, when I first moved out here, I looked up at where the Catholic Church was in the area, and the only one I found was St. Theresa and Valentine. So we went up there once, and then when I got to know the neighbors, many of them were Catholic, and they said, "Oh, we were a mission parish of St. Teresa's here." I said, "Well, you know, I had never heard of mission parishes in the U.S. You know, South America, nothing." But then he said, "Yeah, we're meeting over at the Buggy Whip, we're having mass over there." So I came at the last mass on Sunday, the Buggy Whip here, which was probably 11 or 10:30. So I remember when we were attending mass here, and when we got done, they would move the curtain open. There'd be a couple of the guys who were the cleanup crew, I guess.
That's my husband.
They would come in and have a couple of beers while everybody's walking out, and then they'd go and clean the place up.
Right, and one time, my oldest son, who was then 4.5 years old, he pleaded with Rich if he could stay and help fold the chairs up. Now 4.5 years old.
Yeah.
But he did, and he did fold the chairs up, and then he got to sit at the bar
Oh, yes.
with Rich to have a soda. And Rich said to him, "You can't go home and tell David," because David was 3.5. And he said David would be very unhappy. So Dan kept a secret at 4.5 years old.
I remember they used to have 2 guys that ushered in each mass here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the one Sunday I came, only one guy was here. And he was looking a little flustered with him having to take up the collection with the baskets, and he was the only one. So I volunteered. I don't remember who it was. I was just new to the area then. So I went over and I volunteered and said, "Would you like me to help you take up the collection?" And he said, "Sure, you know, glad to."
And that was it. That was the start of your career.
That was my career. I'm still ushering. I'm 62 years later.
And I remember John Smith.
He brought the statues.
They were about this big.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
He brought them
Of
early.
Mary and one of Mary and one of Joseph. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
they would not allow the Catholic Church to have mass in the public schools.
Right.
But they had Protestant services in the public schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not the Catholic.
So we Catholic showed them and we went to the tavern.
So, and I don't know who those people were. That was before we got involved. No, and there's nobody left.
Right.
We're,
Well, one funny thing I remember is that the parking was very bad.
oh yeah,
Good.
Very bad. And if you didn't get here
early you didn't have a place.
well, I can remember Dan would drop us off, me and the children, and then he would find a parking place. But if you if you were kind of late in getting here, the space was all filled up. And you ended up standing by the bar with your elbow on the bar attending Mass. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember that I don't know who or how they got all those folding chairs. Because
Yeah, they won't
the folding chairs were not part of the restaurant.
Yeah.
But I know there were folding chairs that had to be put up and taken down
Yeah.
each Sunday.
Yeah.
And I think they cleaned the floor. Because I
They did.
remember
Yes.
remarking how beautiful and clean the floor was.
Well, and they put sheets over the beer signs. Yeah, every beer sign had a sheet over it. Anything pertaining to beer was covered.
The thing was though, that no matter how hard they cleaned, you still got the aroma.
Oh, yeah.
It was so strong you could almost get a buzz on just going to Mass.
Did you ever get rid of that?
Stale beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even helped, he's the one that helped us start
Yeah.
the Council of Catholic Women. Well, he said, start with guilds, and I remember, I didn't even know what he was talking about, a guild, I didn't know what a guild was. But then and they had, women from St. Teresa's come out and help us too.
Yeah.
So, that really grew.
Oh, yeah.
At one time, we had 22 guilds.
Yeah, I think maybe even 25, and there were 450 women.
Yeah. But see, it was easy then because none of the women worked.
Yeah, that's right.
So they were available to get
Yeah.
into anything,
That's right.
And everybody had big families, so it was a way out at night
Yeah.
for the women to get out. And so the guilds were very popular.
Yeah.
That and the other activities that they had, my wife, taking care of the kids all day, every day, that gets to be, tedious. But she joined the choir at St.
Yeah, me
She
too.
joined the bowling club or whatever they call it. So she used to go out there and I'd sit home with the kids then.
Right, and then I joined the bridge group. There was a bridge group at Saint Hubert's, only they were much better than I was. And that was a difficult time when I go to bridge. I'd be a nervous wreck that I'd do the wrong thing. Yeah, they did have a
Babysitting club, how getting people to sit for your kids and that. Well, all the kids were small. There was no teenagers in those days.
That's right.
So the mothers all got together and they would take turns sitting at each other's house as
And
needed.
there were different groups for the different
Yes.
areas.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know Joan Marie was part of the one that my wife was involved with too. And
Yeah, well, and those, what's the first year we were there? Mary was ready for kindergarten and there was no kindergarten. And so one of the women on my street was a teacher. And we and a few other women on the block got together and formed a kindergarten. And she taught, and we held it in, I don't remember the name of the church, but the church that's on the corner of Illinois and Roselle was a different name than it is now. But we held the kindergarten in the basement of the church.
I remember when Father Winsick was holding the mass, the first mass when he introduced himself to us at the new church. And he announced that they were going to have a pledge drive for that school. They were going to build a school. And he asked, anybody interested in helping out to come to the church that evening or whatever. And he walked in, he told me later on, he was just amazed. He said there was over 100 people sitting in there waiting, willing to help out.
Remember when he said that when he was coming out to Hoffman Estates, he thought it was going to be a big place, And he said, why did you people bother moving out here?
This is what I was going to say. I don't understand why you all moved out here.
Because it was cheaper.
That's it.
Yes.
We're all young people trying to get a start in life, and we bought it very inexpensive.
Well, see, that's why Phil worked at the fire department in the city. So we gave my mother's address. And he was on a utility bill or something. because we weren't supposed to buy in the city.
Oh, yeah.
We couldn't afford to buy in the city.
Well,
right.
and this was one of the few places that offered GI loans
Yes.
because Rich investigated where there were GI loans, and Hoffman was one of the areas. And he hounded FNS to make sure our house was completed because we had to be out. So the 1st of May, we moved in on a street that was all mud. There were no telephone lines at all for almost 3 to 4 weeks. I had no telephone, and we had one car, and Rich traveled, so he was gone every other week, and I had 3 babies, 4.5, 3.5, and 2. So I was completely isolated. We were the only house on the street who had people in it.
Yeah.
And talk about being a nervous wreck at that time, because I thought if something happened to the children, I was stuck. The closest telephone was in a general store on Schaumburg Road, almost to Roselle Road. And it was a little general store with a phone on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
So I was terrified. I was so happy when a neighbor moved in next door to us about 3 weeks later, and she had a car.
Oh, wow.
So I thought at least if something happens during the day. And when Rich was out of town, I was there with nobody even at night. So,
Then I remember asking, well, why didn't Mullins work? Because they moved in May. I don't know what date. But I said, why didn't didn't you meet Rosa? She said there was a big mound of dirt there, so she couldn't see.
we didn't know anybody was on the other street. No.
Yeah, and we moved in March of '57, and it was all clay. The house was finished with all clay. The road wasn't in. I mean, it was marked,
Yeah.
but the men had to park either on Roselle Road or Evanston and walk to their house, and you had to have boots in the car
Yeah.
because of the mud. But fortunately, the day we moved, it was all dry, and they were able to pull the truck right up to the front door.
Well, and see, when we moved, the movers had to actually put boards down to get up our street because there was no street. It was just mud. I couldn't believe that day. I looked out and I thought, and we're going to be living here?
I was fortunate because I got out of the service in '58. I lived at my brother's house in Elmhurst for almost a year. And then we found a house out here, which was already built, which had a neighborhood and everything.
Oh, really?
And I bought a house that was previously built. So I didn't have to go through all the mud.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, and we had
Yeah,
12.
well, it was.
And I called my folks when we actually bought the house, put money down on the house. I called my mom and dad in St. Louis, and I said, well, we bought a house. And she said, in Chicago? I said, no, Mom, way out of Chicago.
My friends called us pioneers.
And I started crying, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't know anybody here.
I remember when I worked in Bensonville. I used to have to drive back and forth every day. And when we first moved here and then had to go to work, I used to go up Turkey Road. And that was all farmland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, one night I was coming home and I had 3 horses running alongside the car. Where did they come from?
Well, actually, Schaumburg Road was pretty much a farm
Yeah.
area.
Well, all of this, it was little 2 lane stuff
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah.
Well, but what was really helpful was that we had milk delivery,
Yes.
and that was, and he also had eggs and butter and all that. And also a cleaning service came in a truck. They picked up and delivered your cleaning.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, and very helpful,
Yes.
because if you were home alone, I mean, you know, what, your husband wasn't around, Lord, he was working. You had trouble.
This is Earl's Day.
The cleaner man would help.
He lived on Payson. The cleaning guy lived on Payson, which was just up the street from us. Earl was his first name, and he belonged to Saint Hubert's. And he was the cleaner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to get a kick out of it when I moved out here, and people say, well, where are you from? I said, I live in Hoffman Estates. He said, oh, Estates, you must be rich.
Oh, I know. So I live there.
The only hardware store I remember out here was Ace Hardware,
yeah.
just right over here across the corner.
Yeah,
Right.
it was
They had everything.
They had
Yes.
everything. In fact, they specialized in all the stuff that we had in our houses out here.
Yes,
You know,
they
you
did.
couldn't buy it anywhere else.
That's
They
right.
had all the
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
You needed a cabinet or
Yeah.
a handle or something, they had the matching.
Well, you know, I think to this day, Ace, no matter where they are, they're one of the best.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Buggy Whip again.
Thanks for inviting us.
Excellent. You guys have great stories to tell. I read a fascinating story. I think people might be interested, and I know I've asked each of you. The names weren't familiar, but the story of Irene Dickelman and John Shador, and they were. The story goes that they were buggy whippers, but were the first couple to be married in the Saint Hubert Mission Church. But as a way to thank the owners of Buggy Whip restaurant, they held the reception there. So I guess everybody from whoever was at the wedding mass came over here. They had the reception, and it's kind of brought everything full circle. But none of the name doesn't ring a bell.
No.
From February of 1958 to November, mass is held here at St. Buggy Whip.
Yeah.
But in November, the Saint Hubert Mission Church opens up. And it's this wonderful cinder block building. That doesn't exist anymore, right? It used to be in what would now be kind of the southwest part of the parking lot,
Yes.
right next to the Korean church.
Yes.
And for the sake of any St. Hubert alumni watching from the 60s and 70s, we would remember that as the gymnasium.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the first mission church. Tell us about that transition from this tavern that smells like beer, and people would get here too early in the morning to set up, and now you've got this wonderful home, right?
Yes.
How was that?
It was very exciting.
We were all very happy that we could come to church in what looked like a church, and not like a bar.
They only had one problem, that was it had one single bathroom in the back.
That's
Yes.
right.
That was it, and the line up to the bathroom, always there.
Dick still had that when it was a gymnasium. It was horrible.
And the furnishings came from other churches that were from surplus or storage or something.
But it had to be so nice to finally not only have this church that you called your own home, right? Your
Yes.
first parish home.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you've talked about throughout the day that the places in Hoffman that your homes were, literally you could all walk to this,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, fascinating.
It felt more like a church.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Folks, I'm fascinated by history. This has been amazing. Thank you all very much. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts? Anything that you want everybody to know about St. Buggy Whip?
Well, yes, I do. I'm glad this finally came to pass, because I've been kind of urging Father Mike to get something out, because most people in the parish had no idea that we started
That's
at
true.
St. Buggy Whip.
That's true.
So I'm very happy that we finally got something together.
I just agree with her. Yeah. It's just wonderful.
I do too, I agree. It's a good thing that they'll get to know what we started with.
Yeah.
Most
In the
people have
early
no
days.
idea what we had.
No, they have no idea.
The rest is history.
An energetic fundraising pledge drive throughout 1958 facilitated the building of the St. Theresa Mission Church. A temporary church, later known as Saint Hubert Church, was built on Grand Canyon and Hoffman Estates. There was no longer a need for the dining room facilities at St. Buggy Whip. In 1961, the school was built and staffed by Felician sisters. It opened with 11 classrooms and a chapel. As the parish continued to grow, an addition to the school was built in 1963. As for the Buggy Whip Lounge, it remained in its original location until sometime in late 1963 or early 1964, when Mr. Little moved the tavern to the Weathersfield Common Shopping Center at the intersection of Schaumburg and Springenskooth Roads. In 1966, ground was broken for the new present-day church and Sisters Convent. In October 1967, Saint Hubert Church was dedicated by John Cardinal Cody. In time, a library was added to the school, and later additions included a junior high wing and early childhood development. So what became of the building that housed St. Hubert's first faith community? Well, the Langle heirs sold the building to Jerry Troffholz in 1978, and in 1979, it was reopened as Easy Street Pub. A local favorite, Easy Street Pub presented itself as a quintessential dive bar, serving a variety of bar favorites. In 2017, an investment group purchased Easy Street Pub and embarked on a complete renovation to the interior of the century-old building, which today houses Fat Chinese restaurant. With Chinese and Singaporean roots, Fat offers authentic yet modern Southeast Asian cuisine. What began as a labor of love and a strong conviction to propagate the faith, St. Hubert Faith Community owes its love and its founding to the faithful of St. Buggy Whip. Thanks for joining us today.